Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bridgehead, and Happy New Year to all the listeners. I'm sorry it's been a little while since we put out another show. I spent most of the fall on the road, and I had time to go on a few other podcasts, as those of you following us on SoundCloud would have noticed. But I didn't have a lot of time to do interviews and commentary, and I mostly stuck to written columns on the Bridgehead. But in 2018, I want to ensure that we're being a lot more regular, and so I wanted to start this year off with something less depressing than I usually talk about. I've had a lot of people say, Jonathan, you manage to talk about our culture and our society's vices all of the time, but we need something to contrast to that. We need to look at both the good and the bad. So I thought that over the next couple of months, interspersed between the interviews and the commentary I'll do that sort of shine a light on the darkest places in society, that I can also take a look at the virtues and those great virtues that have also been shown in the lives of heroic men and women of the past. And so the interview that I did for the very first show of 2018 is an interview that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I was genuinely thrilled to get this interview. It's an interview with a man named Woody Williams. Woody Williams is actually one of the last surviving World War II veterans and Medal of Honor winners. As many of you will know, obviously, there are not that many World War II veterans still with us. And the story of Woody Williams is just quite frankly extraordinary. He actually witnessed the raising of the American flag over Iwo Jima. Many of you will recognize that very iconic image of the soldiers struggling to raise that flag. And he won the Medal of Honor for his actions on Iwo Jima. He was born on October 2, 1923. And first he was sent to Guadalcanal when World War II began. Then he was sent to Guam, where he participated in the Battle of Guam. And the Medal of Honor was awarded to him for his final campaign at Iwo Jima, where he distinguished himself with actions, quote, above and beyond the call of duty. And I don't want to tell too much of the story because, of course, that's why we had Mr. Williams on. But Williams went forward alone with a 70-pound flamethrower to reduce the devastating machine gun fire from the Japanese pillboxes. And there are some commentators and biographers who actually say that his actions may have changed the course of American history, because those deeply fortified Japanese pillboxes on the island of Iwo Jima were nearly impenetrable. And there were over 1,000 men that were waiting to break through to take the airfield, but they couldn't get through. They couldn't actually get those pillboxes to surrender. And so finally, Woody Williams was the last flamethrower standing. You have to realize here, as you listen to Mr. Williams' story, that flamethrowers had a survival rate of 14%. Only 14% of flamethrowers actually survived. But Woody Williams went in there with his flamethrower for 4.5 hours, while 4 American Marines defended him, covered him, opened fire on the pillboxes to allow him to get close enough, while he operated 6 different flamethrowers. He broke that line of defense and allowed almost 1,000 guys, almost an entire battalion, to get moving towards that airfield. And actually 2 of the 4 Marines who protected Woody Williams from the enemy that day were struck down and killed. He often said that he wore that medal for them. One of the reasons that I wanted to specifically talk to Woody Williams, because obviously the military is filled with extraordinarily brave and extraordinarily courageous men, is because Woody Williams, after struggling with post-traumatic stress due to what he had done on the battlefield and due to the things that he saw on the battlefield, due to the smell of burning flesh that haunted him for years afterwards, was that he turned to his Christian faith in order to find hope. And he now spends his life advocating to live a life of service. And although obviously those of us living far more ordinary lives than the extraordinary things that Woody Williams, as a Medal of Honor winner, accomplished that day during the Battle of Iwo Jima, we can all learn something from his courage. We can learn something from his example. and we can learn something from what he advocates that all of us do. So for the first interview, for the first show of 2018, I want to present a conversation with Medal of Honor winner and World War II veteran Woody Williams. I hope that you're inspired by his story, and I hope that you can keep in mind that there are very few of these noble veterans. There are very few of the veterans of the last, the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw called them, that we can still listen to, that we can still speak with. So I hope you value his story and his testimony that much more.
So first, maybe just tell our listeners a little bit about how you grew up.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised on a country dairy farm.
Okay.
We had mostly milk cows that we would extract the milk and bottle it in glass pint and quart bottles. And, of course, we had an ice box. We did not have refrigeration, but we had ice box, so we'd have to bring ice back with us from town every day on our way back from delivering the milk to individual customers in the city, which was 7 miles away from our farm.
Okay.
And my father started that when I was about 5 years old. So we milked by hand. There was no such thing as automatic milkers back in those days. And we delivered the milk and other produce. People would want eggs or a chicken for Thanksgiving or whatever. And we did have a country telephone. It was one of those that is operated from a switchboard. They would call a switchboard, which was run by a lady, and then she would direct the calls to whoever they were trying to reach. And so the people on the route where we delivered the milk and groceries would call and order whatever they needed. And during the times of holidays like Memorial Day, Easter, July, and Thanksgiving and Christmas, everybody increased their orders because families were coming in to be a part of the festivities for that day. And that was very common back in my day. They would all gather at one place.
Okay.
And it wasn't very far because very few people had cars.
Right.
So you had to walk wherever you went. We started out with a Model A Ford, and then I can just barely remember it, but then we got a Model T Ford.
Right.
Which was a real high-class automobile or pickup at that time. So that's how I grew up, and my mother was still running the farm. My father died when I was 11 from a heart attack, and my mother continued to run the farm until World War II came along.
Right.
And they began drafting people for the military services, and we were in a very small community. There were a very limited number of people available to work. So once they started drafting, she was unable to find workers to help with the farm work, and eventually she had to sell the farm. While we were in the military, I had two brothers that were drafted prior to the time that I entered the Marine Corps. They both went to the Army, and they both ended up in Europe.
And
I ended up in the Pacific.
How old were you when you joined the Marine Corps?
I'll answer your question a little more. I was in the Civilian Conservation Corps at 16 years old. The farm was going downhill at that time. That was in really 1940. And the farm was going downhill. I had one brother next to me, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps because there was just no money. We had no income, hardly at all. And when we joined the CCCs, we called it, you got $21 a month. And that was a lot of money. So he would get to come home once in a while, and he would always have a little bit of money. So I decided that might be a way I could get some money, so I decided to join the Civilian Conservation Corps also. I was only 16. My mother was terribly unhappy, but at that point we did not need parent consent at 16. We could go ahead and go. So I entered the Civilian Conservation Corps at 16, ended up out in a place called Whitehall, Montana. And that's where I was when Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Right.
In December 41. I'd been in it for about a year and a half at that time. I was still 17 years old, hadn't reached my 18th birthday. But they sort of offered us an option. The Civilian Conservation Corps were run by the Army. Our person in charge of our base was an Army officer, and he had Army personnel assisting him, like a mess sergeant and a first sergeant and that sort of thing. And they offered us the opportunity of going straight into the Army if we wanted to, provided we were over 18. If we were under 18, we had to have parent consent. My mother would not agree to that. She would not give me the consent to go, so I came home from the Civilian Conservation Corps, and as soon as my 18th birthday arrived, 1 month later, I went in to go in the Marine Corps. I wanted to go in the Marine Corps to be absolutely truthful and factual because I liked the Marine Corps uniform, and I thought that Army uniform was the ugliest thing in town. So I didn't want to wear that, but when I tried to enlist in November 42, they refused me because I was too short. They had a height requirement at that time of 5'8" or better.
Okay.
And I was only 5'6".
Right.
So they wouldn't take me. And so I went back to help my mother on the farm after that. And then a few months later, they took the height requirement off because somebody realized they were going to need an awful lot of people. And the recruiter looked me up and asked me if I still wanted to be a Marine, and I said yes. So in May of 1943, they accepted me.
And after the training, where did you head off first?
I was sent from West Virginia to California, which was most unusual. Almost everybody east of the Mississippi was to go to Parris Island, South Carolina, which was they only had two Marine Corps training bases, one in San Diego and one in Parris Island. And I should have gone to Parris Island, but there were so many people going in so rapidly, the Marine Corps at Parris Island could not find enough qualified drill instructors and housing to take care of everybody, so they began shipping by train people from the East Coast to the West Coast. So I ended up in California taking my boot training out there. Once I finished that, and then about 3 months of infantry-type training, I went overseas.
And overseas, if I'm not mistaken, you went to Guadalcanal first?
I went to a place called New Caledonia first. It was a replacement center where Marines went in. They weren't assigned yet to a specific organization. They called them replacement people. And there they decided where they would send them to the most need.
Right.
So while at New Caledonia, a group of us was assigned to go to Bougainville, where the Marines were fighting the Japanese at that particular time to fill in the slots where people had been wounded and killed, and we had to do that by the way of Guadalcanal. And so we landed on Guadalcanal, preparing to go to Bougainville, and the Marines in Bougainville secured the island, got rid of the majority of the Japanese, and then they came to Guadalcanal, and that's where I joined the outfit. So I didn't have anything to do with the Battle of Guadalcanal. That had happened in 1942.
Right, and then after Guadalcanal, it was the Battle of Guam.
That's correct. We stayed there for 6 months, then in June shipped out, and we shipped out basically to be support to the 2nd Marine Division. We were the 3rd. To the 2nd Marine Division, who was attacking Saipan. And we were out in the ocean waiting in the event they needed additional Marines. They didn't, so we then were scheduled to go to Guam in July.
What do you remember of that?
Say again, sir?
I said, what do you remember of that?
Well, of course, that was my first combat, and we had little training at all as to how to hit an island or how to land on an island and what to do once you got there.
Right.
Because most of our individuals, other than those that had been at Bougainville, they were non-combat Marines. They hadn't been in combat either, so very few people knew really what was going to happen. But when we hit the beach at Guam, probably was one of the most scary moments of my time. We had to get off of the boat out in the water. The water went very deep, knee-high to waist-high, but we had to get off the boat into the water because the boat hit the sandbar, and then we had to wade ashore. And, of course, the Japanese were shooting at us at that time and dropping mortars on us, and it was first combat experience, so it was a very scary period of time. But once we got ashore, where we could get some ground under us and we could start digging a foxhole or get behind something for some protection, why, we adjusted.
And then the campaign that, of course, that you're most famous for is the campaign at Iwo Jima, where you were distinguished with actions, quote, above and beyond the call of duty. And if I'm not mistaken, you landed on the beach with the 1st Battalion, 21st Marines on February 21, 1945. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah. I'll back up just a little. When we left Guam to go to Iwo Jima, we had no idea where we were going. They didn't tell us where we were going until we got out into the ocean. And, of course, there were no communications, so you couldn't tell anybody where you were going. But they did tell us while we were aboard the ship headed for Iwo Jima that that's where we were going to go. And they had a little board that they produced showing the outline of what the island looked like and its size. They had told us, or did tell us, that it was 2.5 miles wide, 5 miles long. We had just gone from 19 miles from coastline to coastline on Guam, and the guys, including me, the guys around me, the people I was most closely with, my squad, we couldn't figure out why such a little place. Why would we go take such a little place? That couldn't be, it's only 2.5 miles by 5, couldn't be much of anything. And they told us that we would be a reserve unit, probably never get off ship, and we'd probably be gone about 5 days, and then we'd go back to Guam, back to our tents, because they didn't have any intelligence about Iwo. They didn't know they had some 22,000 soldiers there. They didn't know they had all those miles of tunnels. none of that information was available even to the high people in high position. So on the 19th, when the other two divisions hit the island, we were way out in the ocean. We couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything. Occasionally we'd see an airplane go by, but that was it. And thinking, of course, we're not going to get off ship. Well, the first night, they came over the loudspeaker about midnight because of the number of people that they had lost that first day. Prepare, because we're going to disembark. And so we had chow at 3 o'clock in the morning, got all of our gear together, and got off the ship before daylight. Headed, we thought, to the island. And we got out into the ocean. The 4th and 5th Marine Division at that point had not been able to capture enough ground to permit us to come in. We had no place to go if we'd have gone. So we rode those boats all day and then went back to ship that night. And had another 3 o'clock or 3 a.m. breakfast. And the next day, they had been able to move, capture some ground, and the 4th Marine Division had been able to take Mount Suribachi by that time. So they had enough ground for us to come in, and we went in then on the 21st. And on the 23rd, we were still fighting the airfield, the first airfield. Around that place, they had pillboxes. We called them pillboxes. Today, the military uses the term bunkers instead of pillboxes. So we called them pillboxes, and they had a whole number of those protecting the airfield. And as we would try to advance, they had all the advantage. They're inside of a concrete structure. We're out in the open, running from one position to another. And so we were a great target. Consequently, we kept losing Marines very rapidly, and could not break through those pillboxes to continue to advance. Every time we'd try, they would kill a group of us, and we'd have to retreat. I've used a term many times in my life. The one that Chesty Puller used on Korea. We never withdraw. We never retreat. We just advance to the rear.
Right.
So that's what we did. We'd advance to the rear. But I had 6 Marines under me when we landed, and we were all flamethrower demolition trained. We could either burn it up or blow it up. And my job as the person in charge of the unit was to make sure that the operators, the demolition guys and the flamethrower guys, had whatever they needed to function whenever they were needed by the command that they were serving under. And by the 23rd, those Marines were gone. I've never known whether they were wounded or killed. That information never did come to me, so I don't know. But I was the last flamethrower demolition guy in my company, C Company. So that's how I got the job of eliminating some of the pillboxes.
And what was that like? You talked about your first combat experience and how terrifying it was. Reading the account of what you did on Iwo Jima sounds far more terrifying, because you were only covered by 4 riflemen. You fought for 4 hours under enemy small arms fire, and you continually went back to your own lines to prepare more demolition charges and get new flamethrowers, and then go back to the pillboxes. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do. Yeah. I was able to actually eliminate the enemy in 7 of those pillboxes. We couldn't do anything with the pillboxes. They were built so strong with some form of concrete that they had, and metal rods. We call it rebar today in America. With, metal rods in it, so artillery and bazookas, it didn't do anything to them. And so they were fully protected, and they had an aperture across the front of every pillbox. It was about 8 inches in height, and that's where they could stick their rifles out and their machine guns out. That was the only place we could hit. If we were able to hit an enemy, we would have to shoot through that aperture in order to get them. And trying to do that from several yards away, not very effective. So they had all the advantage, and I don't know that I'd had some experience, so I think my experience helped me eliminate some of the fear that I probably would have had if this had been the first time I did that. But much of that day, I do not remember. And it's one of those things that I've lived with all my life, or ever since I came back from the Marine Corps, of how really did I do it, and why wasn't I wounded or hit in some way with shrapnel or bullets or something in the 4 hours. They never touched me.
Right.
But some of those pillboxes are absolutely not in my memory bank at all. I can remember a couple of them very vividly. But one of the things that has absolutely bugged me, still does, I've talked to a number of people why it is true, and I don't really have a good, or haven't been able to get a good, solid answer of how did I get the other 5 flamethrowers. Now, I remember the first one very well, of taking off those 4 Marines. They were assigned to me, and I remember placing them in a position where they could shoot at the pillbox that I am going to approach. But how I got the additional flamethrowers is one of those things that has never been in my memory bank.
Right.
And I don't understand that, never have. I've talked to some psychologists, and they don't have a good explanation either. But I don't have any memory of that.
Do you remember, in the record, it says that at one point there was a wisp of smoke that alerted you to the air vent of one Japanese bunker, and you managed to get close enough to put the nozzle of your flamethrower there and kill the occupants of that bunker. Do you have any memory of that?
I do. Now, that's one of them that I certainly do remember. I think the thing that probably generated my memory or enabled me to continue that memory was I was trying to get to that particular pillbox, and you don't, with 70 pounds on your back, you don't get up and walk around very much. You particularly in danger, you crawl on the ground to make yourself as little target as you possibly can. So I was crawling toward that pillbox in a ditch that the Japanese had dug to enable them to go from one pillbox to another without getting above ground. They could get in that ditch and crawl from one pillbox to another, and you couldn't see them. So I was in their ditch, crawling toward that pillbox, and they were shooting at me with a Nambu machine gun. And I remember the bullets ricocheting off of the back of my flamethrower. And
wow.
And at that, somewhere in that point of time, I saw the smoke coming out of the top of that pillbox. And so at a point in time when they were either reloading the machine gun or run out of bullets or whatever, I jumped up and ran to the side to get out of their line of fire. And that's when I decided I'd go up on top of the pillbox and see where that smoke's coming from, because if there's a hole up there, I can put flame down through it.
Right.
And so that's what I did. That one I remember very well.
And on another occasion, apparently, and this for me, when I was reading the account, seems the most obviously terrifying, you were actually charged by enemy riflemen with bayonets.
Yes, I was trying to get to a pillbox. Here again, I'm crawling. I'm not in the ditch, but I'm crawling. And I get pretty close. I had to get within 20 yards, no more than 20 yards, and that was about a max that I could get the flame. The flame would go that far without dispersing, because once it hit the air, it was a high-octane gasoline and a diesel fuel mixture that my gunnery sergeant had come up with. And once it hit the air, it would fan out into a huge ball of flame. And it would only go so far because of the wind resistance or the air resistance. So I had to get within somewhere around 20 yards in order to roll it on the ground instead of shooting it in the air. If you shot it in the air, it wouldn't go anywhere. But roll it on the ground in a great big ball of about 3 seconds of flame, and it would roll for several yards into a pillbox, and when it hit it, it was huge. It was 10 or 12 feet in diameter, so it would just penetrate whatever opening was in that pillbox, and that's what I was trying to do. When they came charging out, never knew whether they were out of ammunition or they just decided the way to get me is several of them come with bayonets and get me. But I still had flame left. I still had fuel left. So when they came around the pillbox charging at me, well, I just hit them with a whole big ball of flame. And it doesn't burn the bodies up. It catches the clothes on fire, but it takes all the oxygen out of the air immediately, and they die.
After those 4 hours, you actually witnessed the flags being raised on Mount Surabaki, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That really was prior to the time that I had knocked out the pillboxes. We were still at that point, when the flag went up on Iwo, we were still at the edge of the airport trying to get across, or not the airport, but the airfield, trying to get across that airfield. And that was prior to the time that we had gotten across, and we didn't encounter the pillboxes until we got over or through or past the airfield. That's where they had constructed them. Something I have in writing from somebody that says totally on Iwo, he had constructed 800 pillboxes.
800.
800. And these were very close together. They were, I've always said, kind of self-protecting each other, because it made them in such a way that if you went at one, then one or the other of the three in the area, or the pod, or whatever we want to call it, could see you. So he built them that way so that they wouldn't be isolated. If you went at one, then one of the other pillboxes on one of the other sides of that one could see you approaching. So, and he did that. Of course, that guy was well educated in the United States strategy.
Yes, yes.
You know, he'd gone to our schools and visited our bases, and I mean, he knew what we were all about, and he knew we were coming long before we got there.
And then, for you, the war lasted another 5 weeks yet, correct?
Yes. On March 6th, I hadn't been touched to that point, and we were in the advance. We were trying to progress to get to the other end of the island and limit those in the left leg. Never knew whether it was ours or theirs, but that was the only wound that I got. And the corpsman, when he came to me and took care of me, he thought it was bad enough that I should be evacuated. And they put a tag on you so that the people coming to help you get back to the rear or to the aid station will know who you are and that you're supposed to be taken back. He put one of those tags on me and told me that I had to go back to the aid station. And I said, I'm not going to go. He wasn't very happy about that, but he said very forcefully, you're tagged, you must go. Of course, we'd been told that prior to time getting into combat as the corpsman. Whatever the corpsman says is law.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever he tells you to do, you got to do. But he said, you got a tag on you, you got to go. Well, I tore the tag off, and I said, I don't have a tag on me. And he got a call to go someplace else, so he didn't have a chance to put a second one on me. So I stayed. But it wasn't bad enough that I couldn't continue to fight. And we were down to so few Marines. We needed everybody we could get. The day before that, we were down to 17 in our company.
17.
So we needed people.
What was it like in October of 1945, finding out that you were going to meet the President of the United States and get presented the Medal of Honor?
Well, it was to a little old country boy that was very shy and bashful and backward and never been exposed to anything like that. It was really, I don't want to say scared, but certainly nerve-wracking.
After all you went through on Iwo Jima, that was nerve-wracking.
That was nerve-wracking, absolutely. I mean, as a corporal, you don't get ordered to the general's tent unless there's something pretty serious going on. And that was my first nervousness. My first sergeant called me to his office and he said, all we had over there was dungarees and khakis, and said, iron your khakis. They want you to go to the general's tent. And I said, what for? And he said, I don't know. I just got a telephone call and said you're to go to the general's tent. Well, I'm a corporal.
Right. Which general was this?
Huh?
Which general?
Yeah, this was on Guam right after this was in early September, right after the bomb dropping in August. And I couldn't figure out why in the world a little old corporal like me was ordered to the tent, general's tent. But you follow orders, and so I went back to my tent and got out my iron and ironed my khaki so I'd look as sharp as I possibly could. And they picked me up in a Jeep and took me up to the general's tent. I had never even been close to that place. In fact, I didn't even know where it was.
Right.
And had a little driver that drove me up there in the Jeep, and when I got there, the aide to the general, who was a colonel, met us and gave me some instructions. Said, you're going to walk into his tent, and when you get in there, walk up to his desk, stand at attention until he tells you what to do. And as a corporal, we were taught you don't question the colonel. Whatever the colonel says, that's what you're to do. You not say, well, why am I doing this? That's just something we didn't do as Marines. So I walked in, and of course I'm absolutely scared, frightened, and he told me stand at ease, and he used some words. I don't remember what they were, but I assumed, have always assumed, they were kind of a congratulations, and you're going back to Washington, and whether he used the word Medal of Honor, I don't know, because I had never heard the term. I did not know it existed. So if he used the word, it had no meaning to me whatsoever. I've used the comparison 10 years ago. If you would have said to me cyberspace or gigabyte or megabyte, totally unheard of words.
Yeah.
Never been a thing in the world. I still don't know what they are, but at least I'm familiar with the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, So if he'd used the word Medal of Honor, it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it. I didn't know it existed. So then he handed me a big envelope, big brown envelope, and it had his wax seal on the back of it. That's how they sealed their letters back at that time. They had a stamp, and they'd put wax on there, and then they'd put this stamp with a letter in it. And, of course, his name was Erskine, so in that wax was the letter E, capital E. He handed that envelope to me, and this is, you're to take this with you to Washington. Well, I walked outside, back out of the tent, and the colonel was still there, of course, and he saw the envelope, and he pointed to that seal, and he said, don't break that seal. If you do, it's a court-martial offense. Well, I'm not going to break that seal, that's for sure. So those were my orders that I was to turn in, showing the people at my next place, which was Hawaii, why I was coming through there, and give them the information of who I am and my purpose of going through and all that. So they opened them at Hawaii and found out that I'm supposed to go to Washington to receive the Medal of Honor, and here again, if the word was used, I had no idea what it was. They gave me another set of orders and gave me an airplane ticket to fly to Hawaii. I'd never been on an airplane. I'd never been even close to an airplane. So the plane that I flew from Guam to Hawaii was a rather small plane. This plane was a huge thing. It looked to me like I don't even know how it's going to get off the ground. It's so big. But one of my most memorable experiences that I've carried all these years is getting on that airplane with either 48 or 49. I don't remember the exact number now. In fact, I don't know if I ever knew the exact number, of Americans that had been prisoners of war of the Japanese for some of them up to 5 years. Men that had at one time weighed 170 or 180 pounds, now weighed 80 and 90 pounds.
Wow.
They looked like skeletons. They really did. Their cheeks were hollow, their eyes were sunken. You could see every bone in their body. And that left a lasting impression on me that I'll never forget. But they were absolutely the happiest people that I think I've ever seen in my life. Because they were now free and had not been for all those many years, and punished and tortured and harassed and all that sort of thing, and now they're free. So they are really having a good time of being free. And one of them said to me, in fact, the guy that was sitting beside me, And the reason I got my seat was one of them, when they picked them up to get on the airplane, or when they were getting on the airplane, the guy that was supposed to sit where I was sitting died before he got on the plane. So that left a vacant seat, and they didn't have time to refill it. So that seat was empty, and that's why I got it. And one of the fellows, one of the former prisoners sitting beside me, I finally got him telling me some of the experiences that he'd had. I knew nothing about that. I didn't even know about prisoners of war. I didn't even know Japanese had them. But he was telling me some of the things that they had done to them and their work schedule and that food and that sort of thing. And then he made a statement I've never forgotten. You will never know what freedom is until you have lost it. I've never forgotten that.
What do you remember of meeting President Truman?
I remember everything, you do in the military is alphabetical. I jokingly say when I come back in my next life, I'm going to change the alphabet and we're going to start at Z and go the other way. Give those guys in the X, Y, and Z area a chance to being first. Because I was always last.
Yeah.
W, you always last. You have very few Z's in the military. So it's usually W's that are last to get the chow or get anything, get paid or anything. So I'm going to change that. But never dreaming that I would ever see a president, let alone be that close to one. And they called us up alphabetically, so the program, there were 13 of us receiving our medals, and of course they read the citation, and it goes on and on and on. It lasts forever. And by the time they got down to me, I was really a nervous wreck. And when they called my name, my body is shaking. I guess it's the adrenaline running through my body, I don't know, but my body was shaking, and I could not control it. And so when I walked up to him, he shook hands with me, and then somebody handed him the medal ribbon with the medal on it to put around my neck, and he did that, and then he laid his left hand on my right shoulder and said to me, and I'm not the only one he said this to, but I remember it very specifically, I would rather have this medal than to be president. And
wow.
He shook hands with me again and kept his hand on my shoulder. I jokingly said he did that so I wouldn't jump out of my shoes. Shaking. So my body is absolutely shaking. It would not be still. So it was an experience, one that you'll never have at one time in life.
Yeah. And then you struggled with post-combat stress until 1962.
Yeah. My big problem, principal problem, was I was born and raised in a home that was strict, not mean, not brutal or anything like that, but strict. When we were told something, we only were told one time. We didn't question it. Whatever Dad said to do, that's exactly what we're going to do. That's what he expected, and if you didn't do it, then you would suffer some consequences of it with his belt or a switch or whatever. But that's the type of home that I was raised in. And there were 5 of us boys, so we were all raised that way. And certainly taught that you did not kill. Anything of any nature except to kill something for food, or to kill something that had injured itself to where it had to be put out of its misery. You know, like a dog would break a leg, or a horse would get down to where it couldn't get up, and then you would have to use the extreme and eliminate the misery by eliminating the animal. But that was very strictly enforced. I can remember we didn't have rifles. We had one shotgun in the house, and none of us boys had rifles. We used other means. I don't know whether you know what a slingshot is or not.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I grew up on a little farm too.
Okay. Well, we had slingshots, and we used inner tubes for our bands on it, and we got pretty good with it. I think I would classify myself almost as an expert, because I shot that thing a lot. And a couple times in my early teen years, preteen years, I should say, preteen, 8, 9, 10, long in there someplace, I got caught killing a bird. You know, it was just something to shoot at, so I shot at it and hit it and killed it and got caught and got a whipping. You don't do that. That bird didn't do anything to you. You had no reason in the world to kill that bird, so you got to pay the price for it. And that's the way I was taught. So then you go to war, and you have to completely do the 380 or a 960 or something. And if you're going to survive, the other guy can't. And there is nothing in my mind more odorous than the smelling of a human body. It's different than an animal of any kind. It's just not the same. And firefighters tell me the same thing. There is nothing like it. And having to eliminate so many individuals by that means, I could just never get rid of it. I felt I just can't be forgiven for that kind of thing, and I can't forgive myself. It was all wrong, every bit of it. And I couldn't accept the fact that I had no choice. I would have had a choice. I could have made a choice. I would have been punished for it, but I could have made a choice. So I just couldn't forgive myself for it. And those were the flashbacks and the nightmares and that sort of thing that kept bugging me. And in 1962, my life changed as a result of a pastor that opened my eyes that you can be forgiven. God's not going to hold that against you because you didn't wantingly do it. It wasn't a vicious thing that you did. It was something that was in the line of duty. And perhaps by what you did, you saved the lives of others. So finally, I was able to accept that, turn my life around.
And so I've kept you here for almost an hour. What would you want our listeners to know? What have you taken from your experience? You've experienced more things than most people ever will. You've seen things that most people will never have to because of the work of people like yourself and many others. What would you want people to derive from your experience?
Well, I think we were sent here for a purpose. I believe that there is a divine intervention in life, and that we are here for a purpose. Some of us may find that purpose, and I believe I did. I think I found that purpose, and that was to serve other people, to do for others maybe something they couldn't do for themselves or didn't have the knowledge to do for themselves. And by you doing what you did, you made their life better. So I think, well, the Lord said, God sent him to serve. And all of us have that, I think, that ingrained in us. Some of us don't do it, or some individuals don't do it, but I think it's within all of us a desire to help other people. And I believe that was my purpose.
Well, Mr. Williams, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it.
You're sure welcome, Jonathan. My pleasure. Hope you have a wonderful 2018. I'm still writing 17, but I'll get to it about June. Change from 17 to 18.